In Watermelon Sugar by Richard Brautigan is a 1968, although I believe he wrote it a few years earlier, in like around the mid 60s. And it is a short novel, might take a couple afternoon reads, depending on how much time you put into it. Not more than a few hours. Definitely pretty engaging though. Almost a slightly sci-fi, a little bit more slightly surreal, almost I want to say science fiction, but I think that's like kind of reducing it to something that's not totally like true to the nature of the story. But it was a little bit more than trout fishing in America. I feel like trout fishing in America was a little bit more based in reality. This has some reality to it, but it takes place in a I don't know, kind of, I don't know if it's like post-apocalyptic would be the right term, because it's uh, takes place in this community following the fall of civilization. And um, Watermelon Sugar basically is like this great resource for all the characters throughout this, and it follows IDEF. IDEF, DEAF, as in death of a salesman. Um, and it's basically a certain community that the nameless narrator that we don't, and then this other guy named Inbroil, who's like a very edgy kind of restless rebel, and he is basically invested his time, and he's basically a lot like he loves. At first, he loves IDEF, but he ends up going into like a different area, or in this place called the Forgotten Works, and it's like the way he describes it is really interesting. It's like the Forgotten Works was like this great trash heap of civilization where all the great works and everything, um, in almost in a similar way to like the Library of Alexandria being burnt down, and how such great knowledge and all these events like have been wiped away, and it's like that's why nobody really knows. Like there's like so many odd things in these things. Like you could never know what. It's like history in that sense is like kind of left determined to the whims of us. Like how much do we want to, how much effort do we want to put into maintaining and being resourceful, and how much do we want to be destructive. So yeah, so he makes um, the narrator ends up falling in love with a woman named Margaret, and they are quite intimate, and they um, basically in Boyle like goes off and um, there's a great storyline with the tigers. These tigers that are have a capacity for human speech, and they are also like like quite skilled. Not only that, but like also good at like mathematics too. And that's kind of one of the meanings. Like that's kind of what prompted the narrator to be where he is in this place where he is now in the story, at least. Because he reveals that his parents were actually killed by tigers, and then he doesn't have anybody to help him with math, so he asks the tigers, and they're like, "You'll help you." It's kind of an interesting, kind of very, very like oddball, offbeat kind of thing that like makes it so wacky. When I was like reading it, it was like, wait, tigers, like, and then the tigers ate his parents. It felt like so unbelievable that it was hard to take seriously. Yet somehow I did, because Brautigan has a way of, he did this with trout fishing in America, where he's able to kind of weave in the absurd aspects with like a minimal but totally in earnest kind of just sincerity with it. Like it's not tongue in cheek, and it's not haha, look how stupid all these things are. It's not like um and there's nothing wrong with that necessarily either, but like he engages you, and he connects you to the story with some amount of passion with it. Like he's like, there's like an underlying kind of longing and wistfulness to these kind of scenarios that you're like, oh, you can't help but be made me think a little bit of Shelf Silverstein too, with like these kind of absurd scenarios, and that one might think of a child might thinking up at some point, um, child childlike rather than childish. And then so there's a um, yeah, the Tigers are very talented and precocious, and they're playing uh, they're capable of playing instruments, and But they basically end up, they all kind of abandon, I think, the tigers, and I think that turns into a trout hatchery, and again, here's with trouts showing up. Anthropomorphic animals, and these trouts are being like portrayed as being like very quick. Like he puts up, I think he puts up a bit of watermelon sugar. Yeah, like things are made out of watermelon sugar too. It's like all these things too, like these the glass houses, and like the windows of the glass were made out of watermelon sugar. So it's like he keeps like reintroducing the theme. It's like a motif of like, and then I thought that was interesting. And then it gets pretty chaotic near the end. Like the basically in Boyle comes back to I death, sorry, and then he takes with him like a cluster of people, and then he wants to show people what I death really is. It's like, you guys want to know what it really is? And there's like a kind of really like hysteria to the way he talks about this. He's like, you really want to know what I death is? And he's like really just egging people on, and he's like, people are getting angry at him. Margaret is like, you know, and the narrator think that he's pretty much like a kind of a jerk at this point with no point. But you kind of start to see like his side a little bit. Like you start to kind of see maybe he's getting at something that like, like you guys are living a lie, And I thought there was something interesting to that. Because this isn't just a series of like vignettes, It's like it is in some sense. It seems like it is. It seems like, oh, like there's like the place where these people make kind of brew whiskey, and there's and then they go to this cave, and then they go here, and then they go there. Not these things exactly happen, but like it's actually a series of different pertinent events that all tie together somehow. And if they don't seem important in the moment, they're certainly going to be important later. So he's like, and then everybody kind of knows when he asks this question, like that's something foreboding is, he's kind of auguring that something bad will happen. And yeah, basically in Boyle, almost in a kind of seppuku kind of Japanese honorary way, he actually kills himself, and then just he starts like kind of cutting off. At first, I think he starts cutting off his with some kind of trout thing that's used for gutting trouts. I forget what he calls it, but he starts cutting off his fingers, and then it's like he eventually goes to his face and starts cutting off his head, and then finally he's just dead, and it's just like it's like a slow death by paper cuts almost. It's like very like the way he describes it, just very like almost like graphic, but at the same time I also felt like because it was still kind of in the plane of like this very surreal, odd, offbeat, peculiar, imaginary world. Like I felt like at these things like Brautigan could get away with like describing these without being too like graphic about it. So, with being graphic about it as well. But yeah, he in Boyle dies, and then but the whole time Margaret and I think the narrator, but mostly Margaret doesn't seem to get kind of what's going on, and but she also doesn't really have a lot of concern for like what might happen to her friends as well, which is like a little bit concerning. And then you wonder if she's like maybe forcefully ignorant of certain things, and she just wants to kind of live in a kind of fairy tale land with in I death forever. And yeah, they also talk about a time when the tigers they have human speech, and that there's a time before when they didn't have that. And that's like kind of an interesting thing of like of the interesting kind of dynamic of like how this new reality that they have is like so bizarre, but like to them it's completely normal. And like the past to them was like a kind of allotted kind of the ash heap of civilization was just like this great magnitude of kind of like a trash heap in the back. Like they had civilization to them was like a great mystery. Like they don't know anything but I death. So at the end of it, so yeah, the narrator is I think because Margaret is excommunicated from I death, and he ends up ending their romantic relationship. So yeah, so as far as themes go, there's an interesting kind of analogs drawn to like a biblical like Garden of Eden, that, you know, Margaret and the narrator were kind of an Adam and Eve bond. Um, but there's also kind of an interesting kind of post-modern thing going on with, yeah, like with the like the kind of allusions to technology and like the rise of technology today. But yeah, there's it's like it's both like kind of rustic pastoral yet also kind of um metropolitan as well, if that makes sense. But yeah, that's all I have for Watermelon Sugar by Richard Brautigan. I definitely recommend it. It's a short read, so why not give it a shot? And thanks for watching.